I wanted to share some lessons learned from my last visit to a traditionally African American church. My family and I had the chance to visit Mahan St. First Baptist Church last week, and it was a dynamite experience. And I had just a great opportunity to reflect on what does the more traditionally white American church have to learn from the African American church. In community development, we talk about what's called asset-based community development versus needs-based community development. Needs-based community development starts with what is wrong, what are the problems that need to be fixed, what's wrong with a community or a person, versus starting with what is right about a person or a community. What are the specific traits and qualities and histories and different things that truly reflect God, that are good, that are to be celebrated? When you start with what's wrong, it's paternalistic. It can be quite demeaning, and quite frankly, it's very arrogant to start with that and to come in and say, "What's wrong with you? We're going to be a part of fixing it." Versus coming in and saying, "What is right here that we can learn from, that we can celebrate, that we can build up, and then use those things to help to become more and more and more like Christ as a human or just an individual or as a community." So right now I want to take what was really good and right and wonderful about specifically the church that we visited, but I think it does apply to, in general, to traditionally African American churches. The biggest takeaway I have is that African American churches are beautifully good at communal worship. In general, that's one of the easiest things to point out as one of the assets of African Americans is the community, relationships, that people know one another, they care about one another, extended family, the commitment of family to one another. But you see that in their worship service as well. And let me list some ways that we saw that specifically. During the welcome time, the welcome and greeting, instead of just turning to the person behind you or the person beside you and saying welcome or peace be with you, people get up, they walk around, they hug one another, even if they don't know one another. We didn't know that many people there, and my husband didn't know anyone there. We were hugged over and over and over again by lots and lots of people. People came all the way across the very large sanctuary to give hugs. People mingled, they physically and verbally interacted with one another, and that was just a beautiful picture of community there. Secondly, during the songs of worship, the traditionally white church, specifically Westminster, we're used to singing 3 to 5 songs that last around 3 minutes throughout the entire service. And these songs are vocabulary rich. They tend to have several verses, to be contemporary hymns or traditional hymns, and then a chorus that you sing. The chorus is repeated, but again, the chorus is often vocabulary rich, meaning it has a lot of words. You can sing the song and mean it, but you're not. There's no argument against this style of worship. That is the traditional style of worship in Westminster. In traditionally African American churches, there's usually 1 to 2 songs that are sung for a very long time, and they have very few words. So what you're doing as you're singing these songs is you are meditating on, you're ruminating on, you're getting these words into your heart. But not just your own heart, you're rousing up one another, you're reminding one another, and you are rejoicing together. Let me say that again. You're rousing one another up. As you sing these songs together, you're rousing each other up to worship. So the song that we sang was called Waymaker, and the words are Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. And you sing that over and over and over and over and over again, and then there's a bridge, and then you come back to those words. And sometimes the choir is singing it, sometimes the congregation is singing it, sometimes part of the choir is singing it, and then the choir leader is repeating it back. Sometimes it's just a solo by the choir leader, but it is over and over and over again. People are standing up and sitting down and raising hands and sitting down again and dancing, and it's very, very participatory and holistic, but we're rousing one another up. As I'm singing Waymaker, I'm thinking, where are the places that God made a way for me this week? You know what? This morning was super distracting coming into church, and it's It takes a while to get myself into a place of worship because, um, let's just be honest, our kids always fall apart, and we always fall apart on Sunday mornings trying to get ready for church. We want it to be this specific thing, and then we get all distracted. So the first few times I'm singing this song, I'm just getting it down, get myself into, okay, all right, right, we're here to worship the Lord. We're here to worship the Lord. And I'm starting to think about, how did God make a way this week for me? How did God make a way? How did God keep promises for me this week? Then I'm looking across the room and I see Barbara. And I know that Barbara just lost a family member. And Barbara is singing this song, and I'm seeing how she is worshiping. She is singing these things, and I am aroused to worship by seeing Barbara sing those songs. I'm looking up at the choir. I know several people in the choir. One of the people in the choir lost a son to suicide. She lost her husband. She's been a widow. She lost her only son. And as she is singing that, how God has kept promises to her through those really awful times, man, I'm challenged to say, man, if she is worshiping like that, I need to be worshiping the Lord like that. So we're rousing one another up. We're reminding one another. As we're singing this song together, we're reminding one another of the way that the Lord has been a way maker and a promise keeper, and how he is light in the darkness. And there is darkness. And we're rejoicing with one another. Often in our churches, we see worship as an individual experience between myself and God. We tend to often we close our eyes, or we're looking at the words, but it's a very individual experience between me and the Lord, and I'm worshiping the Lord. Versus this, it is such a communal aspect. We are worshiping the Lord as a community, as a body, as a family. And we are reminding one another over and over and over again who we are. We are different. We are the body of Christ. We are not the world. We are here to worship the Lord. We're reminding ourselves of that. We're rejoicing together. We're rousing one another up over and over and over again. That style of worship can seem very put on to people. It can seem like a show to people. But I would argue that it's a wonderful, wonderful way to worship the Lord. I was very used to that style of worship while I lived in Tanzania. And it was absolutely life-giving to me to be a part of that again. Next, we see this communal style of worship in the message itself. As the message is being preached to the church is participating in it. People are responding to the message. They're responding to the pastor verbally, loudly. So when they really are resonating with something, they're standing up. They're putting their hand up in the air. They're physically participating. They're holistically participating in that message. And again, this idea of rousing one another up, the idea of reminding ourselves and reminding one another, the idea of rejoicing with one another. Now, I would say that this is a really wonderful part. I'm a adult education person, so in adult education, we classically say that we remember 10% of what you hear, 20% of what you see and hear, but 80% of what you see and hear for yourself. So another part of the message that's very participatory and communal is when the pastor says over and over again throughout the message, now turn to your neighbor and say to them, God is a waymaker, or we have let's see, I'm trying to think of some of the specific ones that he said. We have a bent to sin, and turn to your neighbor and say that. Now, when you're doing that, yeah, it can feel very awkward and put on or whatever it is. I've heard people even say that it feels like they're just filling space. But I would argue that it's not that. It's us really participating as a community in that message. When I turn to my neighbor and I say to them, we have a bent to sin, what I'm doing is I'm drilling that message into my heart and my mind. I am learning that deeply. I'm participating in that. And I think that's a very important thing that we can learn. So that style can seem odd, but I think that it's really actually quite truth-telling and effective. Then another part of the service that's very communal is the offering. It's very traditional for African American churches to come up to give their offering. So people come out of their seats, their pews, whatever it is, and come to the front and put their offering in the offering plate, or maybe lots of ushers or deacons are holding various offering baskets or whatnot. And I've heard it argued that that is putting on a show of giving, and our giving should be in secret. That actually wasn't, the Jews didn't do that. The offering was often very bodily and seen. And again, I would argue that that is an important part of physically, holistically participating in worship to the Lord through giving. And as I know that Sarah is having a hard time financially right now, but I'm seeing her go up and give, and that is encouraging to me. That rouses me to worship. That reminds me of the faithfulness of the Lord and His promises and His word, and it pushes me to rejoice with Sarah in that. So that's another one. Um, let's see here. The last point I want to make is this. We bring our children to worship. We have young children. A lot of people go to nursery or children's church. My children aren't old enough for children's church yet, and that I believe in that. I believe in children participating in worship. In most African American churches, there is no nursery, and in this church, which is a large, modern, fairly wealthy African American church, there's no nursery. Everybody has their kids in there, and again, I think that gets at this communal worship. We are here as a group. We stand out from the world by coming here together as families, as units, together to worship the Lord. Now, it actually was much easier for my children to sit through the service because it was a louder, more participatory, more active worship service than our worship service. Ours, they have to sit still and be quiet, and while we do sing and we do pray, and my girls do put their money in the offering. Largely, their role right now is to quietly sit through the service, versus here. During the songs, there were children dancing up front. My children got up and danced. And yes, my children don't really understand what they're singing. But again, their dancing rouses me to worship. It reminds me and reminds others of who God is in His Word. And it pushes us to rejoice. So, again, the role of children in the worship service is so different. And again, since the sermon has so much response, so much telling one another, it was easier for my children, and again, it's really a beautiful thing to see that whole communal worship style. So the moral of this story, the big bottom line is this: we as Westminster Church, as a traditionally majority white church, have so much to learn from our brothers and sisters who are in African American churches, and I'm looking forward to learning more and more. Thanks.